Hey everybody, welcome to Rowdy Alternative. Today we have Taylor Kimball, who is producer for pretty much everything that's hot out there in Texas right now, that whole area. From Koe Wetzel to Kody West, Giovanni, Reed, Southall, Austin, Meade, he's done it all. So we're going to dive into that today. How you doing, Taylor?
Doing pretty good. I'm a little tired. I just had a baby like 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. So I don't get a lot of sleep,
Congratulations.
but doing pretty good. Thanks. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Right on. You been busy at all with work?
I've been pretty busy. I had to wrap up a bunch of projects right before I had a kid. So it's a little slower right now, but I'm just trying to get back into the swing of things and figure out how to do this with a kid. I am married and I have a wife and she's at home with the kids, so that helps. But
Right on, right on.
yeah, not a lot of sleep.
Yeah, I could imagine.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's dive into it, man. I guess let's start out like where you're from, your background, and like how'd you get your start doing the production aspect in the music industry and everything.
Man, well, I was born in Tracy, California, which is like an hour east of San Francisco, and then my parents moved over or to East Texas when I was 1, and that's kind of where I lived until I was 18 in a town called Mount Pleasant. And funny enough, it's 20 minutes down the road from where Koe grew up, but we never knew each other until after I'd already moved out of Mount Pleasant. And so Mount Pleasant's a super small town, and both my parents are musical. And so when I was a kid, they had me taking piano lessons and guitar lessons. And I hated it, but I stuck with guitar and wound up stopping piano, which now I wish I would not have. But yeah, I've always been into music, and growing up, I got into drums when I was probably like 12, and that's when I really fell in love with music. And so I was always trying to find friends who would play guitar or whatever and trying to form a band. And had a few of those, and then growing up in a small town, if you're like decent at anything, they think you're incredible. So my whole life it was always like, "Oh, Taylor's so good at drums." When in reality, I was like, just okay. Because I moved to Fort Worth after Mount Pleasant, and you start meeting real musicians, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not good. Um, so straight out of high school, I started touring in a metal band called A Bullet for Pretty Boy, and I did that for like 3 years, and I quit because I was just tired of. I didn't like the road. I didn't like being gone. Like, I'm super introverted, homebody. I don't really like to go out much, but so I got off the road and I was just like, man, what am I going to do? So I started making beats on my computer, and it was like EDM music, and I did a record of that, and it's super cheesy stuff. But that's like kind of what got me into recording. I was just like, dude, this is awesome. Like, I can create whatever I want. And so, and when I had formed those bands when I was younger, my parents had a computer, and I bought this program called Reason, and it's like a recording program. So I was always kind of dabbling with it as a kid, but I didn't really know a ton about it. And so one of my friends was a Texas country singer, and I didn't know what Texas country was. I grew up listening to metal, so I hated country music. I just thought I never gave it a shot, because if you're a metalhead, you just think everything else is dumb. And so
Right.
he was like, "Hey man, you want to play drums for me? I'm doing all these Texas country gigs, and it's just a ton of cover songs." So I was like, "Yeah, sure." So he sends me a list, and I had never heard of anybody on it. And there was like Stoney LaRue and Randy
Yep.
Rogers and, Casey Donahue, all the classics. And so that kind of opened my eyes to that whole world. And I was like, oh, this isn't so bad. Um, so I started playing gigs with him, and then he was like, I want to record a single. I was like, well, I kind of know how to do it. So recorded a single with him, and his name was Jordan Kingston. He's from Mount Pleasant too. And then Koe heard that, and we got a show opening for Koe in the Stockyards in Fort Worth. And this would have had to have been 2012, 13, maybe.
Ooh, wow. Okay.
And so that was the first time that was the first time I'd met Koe. And then Andreas, or Dre, Koe's now TM, is also from Mount Pleasant. Didn't know him either until I moved away, but he was playing drums for another guy in Mount Pleasant named Bo Hennessy, and also Trey Hubrell. And he heard the song I did for this Jordan guy. He's like, dude, I want to record a record with you with this Trey Hubrell guy. Turns out Trey is Koe's cousin. So I do this record for Trey. Koe hears that. Then I get a call from Koe, and he's like, hey, I want to cut a record with you. And then we did Noise Complaint. And it was just like, then I was in this whole country world, and I was like, what happened? Super thankful to be here. I love it. You know, I love the music now. And that's kind of like when Koe came to me, he knew I'd toured in metal bands, and he was like, I'm wanting to do like a heavier, you know, country thing. And the words he told me is, he was like, I want it to sound like it was recorded in an old barn. I was like, okay. And he introduced me to Cross Canadian Ragweed. I was just like, man, there's this whole world that I had no clue about. And then Noise Complaint happened, and I was just like, whoa, well, guess I'm doing this. And I've been super fortunate. Like, Koe's been so loyal with just like bringing me along for the whole ride. So it's been awesome.
So, you said that he wanted to be like a heavier version of like the typical Texas country sound. So that was for Noise Complaint? Because I know he progressively got even like more rock oriented. Wow. Okay. So even back then he wanted it to be more loud and heavier. Okay.
Yeah. He was like, I want loud guitars. I want it to sound like Nirvana-ish, you know, just grungy.
Yeah. The grungy sound. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you didn't have any like prior like education with like recording or production or anything? You just kind of hopped into it?
Yeah. Like going back to when I was a kid, like my parents or my family would always fly to California for the summers, like where where we came from or whatever. And the airport, there would always be these recording magazines or Guitar World. And I would always grab the recording one, and I would just, you know, read through it and stuff. And so I always was just trying to keep up. But yeah, no school, and Noise Complaint was the first full length that I ever produced. And it was just right place, right time. And so I kind of had to learn, because, you know, Koe was blowing up so fast. And I was like, dude, if I want to stay a part of this team, I got to get good, like real fast, because I don't want to hold Koe back, you know?
Yeah, I was about to say that's like the perfect like record to start on, just looking back on how big it got even today.
Yeah, I still remember making it, and half that record we made in his bedroom. And like, I just took some gear up to Stephenville, set it up in his room, and we would just work. And I just remember as soon as he showed me February 28th, I was like, oh, dude, this is a good song. And LJT was like right around the corner. And I was like, dude, do you think you're going to get to play the main stage at LJT? And he's like, nah, I doubt it. Because I was like, dude, this record's cool. But I mean, we had no clue what it was going to do. There's no way, you know.
Right.
But
are there any
looking back at that record? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just like, looking back at that record, it's hard for me to listen to from a quality standpoint, because it's just like, but it's also, you see the growth. Like, that's another cool thing, is like me and Koe started basically at the same time together. We didn't know what we were doing. And it's like, I feel like if you listen to the records in order, you can hear a progression from both of us on both sides. And it's just kind of cool in that perspective. But yeah, it's hard for me to listen to it, because it's just like, the mix isn't good and a lot of stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh. But, you know, none of that really matters. So
Right. I mean, that's part of the process, even with like whether it be like you behind the scenes or the artists themselves. It's just, I need to outdo my last project as I go on.
yeah,
And that's what makes music so unique.
yes, I agree.
Yeah. So, are there any like, I guess you could call them like influences, like inspirations with like who do you look to like when you're producing something, mixing something? It's like, okay, I like the way this guy did it, or is it more just like you kind of doing your own thing?
Man, it's always changing. Like it's really like I'll hear a record and I'll be like, oh man, this record's incredible. And then I'll go and see who did it, and then I'll go and look at their all the records that they've done. Um, but it's more so like I'll hear records that I think are awesome, and I'll just get obsessed with them. And I'll be like, I want to make a record that sounds like this. Um, but as far as producers go, like there's a guy named Jay Joyce who's huge in Nashville. He does like all of Eric Church's stuff and Miranda Lambert and Lainey Wilson.
Mm.
But what he's doing to me is super cool because he came from the rock world. And so his productions tend to have a little bit more guitar and stuff, but it's a nice blend. But other than him, it's just, I don't know. I'm always looking for inspiration. But like I said, I'll just find an album, be like, dude, this is awesome. But Chris Lord Alge is a mixer, and he was like always my idol and always what I was shooting for sonically. But yeah, other than those two dudes, it's just kind of, I'm always looking for cool records to be influenced by.
Are there some records that come to your mind when you think of that? Like, this is like the epitome of what I want to make one day.
Man, okay. So back when before I even knew Koe, I was playing with that Jordan guy, and that's when Florida Georgia Line hit the scene. I didn't know anything about Nashville country versus Texas country. I didn't know anything. I just remember hearing Cruise on the radio, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, dude, this sounds like a rock record to me. Like it sounded massive." I was like, my goal is to make a record that sounds that good. And that's actually Joey Moy, who's another massive producer in Nashville, Morgan Wallen Hardy.
Yeah.
And he's doing super cool stuff. But now there's this band called Tiger Cub, and I think they're from the UK, and they put out a record. I forget what the record was, but it sounds super cool. And I looked up who produced it, and it's this guy named Adrian Bushby, who's from the UK, and he's engineered Foo Fighters and Muse. And so that record came out right before we started El Paso. And so I hit him up and I was like, dude, I'd love for you to come engineer this Koe record, because I love this record you did with this Tiger Cub band. And he flew over and engineered the record for us, and it was awesome. So he's a huge influence for me. But yeah, Lainey Wilson's new stuff is incredible, in my opinion. And that's drawing a blank. The guy I just said, one of the producers. Can't think of his name.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually,
there's
this band called Bad Flower, and their records to me are always like sonically awesome. So I'm always kind of referencing them. And yeah, but a lot of times it's like the band will come in and they'll throw me some references, and I'll just kind of deep dive into that, whatever they're listening to. So.
Okay. That kind of leads me into my next question. How involved do the artists get in the recording process, and like how? I'm sure you're fine with it if they do, but like how involved is it? Depend, or do you kind of invite them to come and like say, "Hey, what do you think of this?" Like,
man, it varies from artist to artist. Like Koe is very much a producer in himself. Like he's got the craziest ideas, and they're always, most of the time, they're always great ideas, and it's just like I just kind of get in the room with him. Like we've worked together so long now that I feel like we kind of know what each other wants. So it's a lot quicker now. But like at first, I would just kind of be in the room and let him do his thing and just help out where I could. But some other artists, they need a lot more help, and they just don't quite have as clear of a direction of what they want as some others do. Like Koe knows exactly what he wants, and that makes my job easier because I can just kind of go after that. So yeah, it just really varies. I tend to give the artist a lot of control and freedom if I trust them and know that, like, okay, this is really what you want. All right, well, let's do it. But some will come in here and be like, I think I want to sound like this, or I think I want to sound like this. And it's just kind of a journey, finding that, which, everybody's got to go through that stage at some point.
Right. So this is just a question that I've been clueless on forever. Cause like I write these articles for Raise Rowdy, and whenever I do maybe an album review or any kind of review, and I like to go into the production, like crew, whoever's behind that, I have no idea what to say besides produced by. And I know there's mixers, I know there's engineers. Can you tell us listening, who's as clueless as I am, what the difference is between a producer, a mixer, and an engineer?
Yeah. So, and nobody really ever, like, if I'm hanging out with my wife's, or if we're hanging out with my wife's friends and they ask what I'm doing, and I say nobody has a clue. So it's just one of those weird jobs. But yeah, a producer is basically a manager of the project. It's like, it's my job to find the musicians, book the studios, make sure we have all the songs, and then also, if I want to hire an engineer, who do I think would be the best fit for the record or mixing or whatever. So yeah, basically, like Koe will say, let's make a record, and I'll be like, okay, cool. And he'll start sending me songs, and we'll get songs together. And then, like El Paso, I was like, hey, we should do it. Or actually, he brought up Sonic Ranch, but I was looking everywhere. I was like, do you want to do it in LA? Do you want to go to Nashville? Do you want to do it in Texas? And we looked at studios everywhere, and we just kept coming back to Texas. And it's like, man, there's a little bit of that pride. It's like, why do we need to go to Nashville to do this? So we booked Sonic Ranch, and then I wanted to bring in Adrian because I thought he'd be a good fit. So yeah, producer is just basically like, you're just in charge of the whole project and making sure everything gets done, as well as being a big part of the creative process. And then the engineer is basically the guy running all this stuff. And it's like, you kind of tell the engineer, it's like, hey, I want the record to kind of sound like this. And then they start dialing in tones for you, and you're like, yeah, that sounds awesome. And then a mixer is the second to last step. So basically, once the record's completely recorded and edited and stuff, you either send it off to a mixer, or I mix pretty much everything I do. So then I just start mixing it. And then once I get a mix where I feel like it's pretty good, I'll send it to the artist, and then they'll send me feedback like, hey, could we turn the vocals up or whatever? And then it gets sent to mastering. And what mastering is mastering is probably the hardest thing to explain because it sounds so basic, but it's really not. But you send mastering the mix, and it's just it's an audio file of the song, and their job is to kind of make it as loud as everything else while shaping the overall sound of it, and just kind of, if they hear anything that's popping out, they just kind of tweak it a little bit. But yeah, that's kind of the layout. And then you've got, musicians and assistants and stuff other than that. But
yeah, so it's bigger than just like a one person thing, I guess. Well, but you said that you do it all. So that's, I guess
depends on the budget.
Has to take some. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Like if it's not a label budget and the band's not, making bank, and the budget's a lot smaller than, we'll have to do everything here ourselves. And it's kind of like, and I've got a full-time assistant. His name's Adam Urbanzik, and he plays on pretty much every record I do, and he helps engineer and stuff. And like, he's a huge part of it. So yeah, when the budgets are smaller, it's basically we're doing everything in-house.
Okay. So another thing I wanted to ask you is I'm not gonna ask you to pick the favorite record you did, because I feel like that's like picking your favorite child. So is there like a
You're gonna get me
certain
fired.
album? Yeah. Oh, okay. I mean,
No,
I mean, like
kidding.
when you first, like, was there a certain record you could pinpoint? I know you were talking about Noise Complaint earlier, but like when you were thinking like, wow, like this is something, like this is going to be like big, or was it just like out of left field? You're like, holy shit, this just happened.
Man, I mean, Koe, he's the first full length I ever did. And so he really, like, I can't not say Koe. And Noise Complaint, it's not my favorite record just because of the issues I pointed out.
Yeah.
But that was definitely like, once that started gaining traction, I just remember I was like, oh, dude, I'm good to go. I'm good. And then I was like, my phone's going to start blowing up. And then I didn't get a single phone call. Actually, I take that back. Reed Southall called me because Dre told him to hit me up. But other than that, it was like, man, I thought people would just know. And then I met my now wife. She's like, well, why don't you just start reaching out to bands? And I was like, I don't know. That feels weird. And then as soon as I started reaching out to bands, they were like, oh, dude, yeah, we had no clue. We'd love to work with you. And I was like, I'm in. So I just kind of sat around for a year waiting for something to happen, being dumb, stubborn. But yeah, that was like, as soon as that started taking off, I started sweating a little bit because I was like, oh my gosh, I think it sounds bad. I really hope Koe cuts another record with me so I can redeem myself. So he comes back and we do Harold Saw High. I felt like it was a little better. But then after it dropped, it's same thing. I was like, oh my gosh, I hope he comes back because I feel like I'm getting better. And so it's been like that. But I mean, El Paso for me is definitely my favorite record that I've done so far. But, it was just such a big production, and we had basically an unlimited budget, and, Koe was bringing in some killer songs and all that. But I mean, dude, I truly do love every record that I've worked on, but Koe's been my day one. So it's like without Koe, I would not have met any of my other bands. So.
Right. Yeah. I get what you're saying, but like, and you could brag here for a minute, because this is just an observation I made. When you look, people go to your website and they look through your portfolio, and at least from what I was a fan of, like, because I used to live out in Texas and Oklahoma area, and I first got into Koe very late, but like I went back, listened to all his stuff, then I went to Reed, then Austin Meade, then branched out into all these other guys, and I looked on your website, and it's like everybody that I listened to, you produced like everything. So it like that was funny to me, and I was thinking like, do you like think about that? Like, because it's there's no lying that these guys are like super hot out there right now. And like, do you think like, wow, I have a hand in every single one of these, whether you like it or not, you have a hand in it, like their progression and all the fame or accolades they're getting. Like, does that ever come to mind to you?
Yeah, it's definitely tempting to think about that. But one good thing about my job is that every day I'm in here. And so I don't, like when Koe comes in here, it's usually just Koe. And so I'm not seeing, the fans going crazy. And with any artist that I work with, it's like, yeah, I'll go to shows and stuff and it's pretty mind blowing, but I'm not constantly seeing all the hype going on. And I think that's a good thing. I try not to think about it because it's funny. I've got a buddy who hit me up one time and he was like, "Hey, I'm at this college party and there's these people talking about how much they hate all these new rock bands in the Texas scene." And they just like listed off
Oh.
Koe, Austin, Geo, Reed. And so I was like, man, that is humbling. So I think there's, it seems like Koe's kind of equaled out his fan base now, but there's definitely like, I know that there's people who don't love what I'm doing, and then there's people who do, and it's like, you're never going to make everybody happy. And I'm constantly,
you'll have that.
Yeah. And I'm constantly just looking at the records that I've done. And I'm like, man, I could have done a little bit better. So I'm always looking at it in that sense and hoping that I'm not ruining this Texas scene here with loud guitars.
I frankly think it needs to be shaken up a bit. It got a little stagnant from what I remember. So personally, hell, you look at all the people showing up to these shows, like you said, there's no denying that making waves everywhere.
Yeah. It's been crazy. And, Koe or most of the artists I work with, they're such great personalities that it's just like, it felt like refreshing once all this stuff started happening, at least to me. 'Cause, I grew up on rock and metal and I was like, oh, this is cool to me. I like it. So that's all that matters. And the artist likes it, that's the most important thing.
Yeah. So let's talk about Sour Sonics. I guess just tell me what it's all about. Introduce it to everyone listening.
Man, so Sour Sonics is a record label that I started. I think I officially announced it like a couple months ago, but I've been dreaming of doing a label for close to 10 years now. I read this book by L.A. Reid, who is a producer. He was actually one of the people on The Voice at one point, but it was just his whole story. He started out as a musician, and then he met Babyface, who's another producer, and they started writing songs together. They basically created TLC and like all these huge pop acts in the 90s. And then he went on to start a label with Babyface, and then he sold that label. Then he got, a position at a bigger label and just kept going up. And I was like, dude, that just sounds awesome. So I've always wanted to start some kind of label. And right now it's like, I kept meeting artists that I wanted to work with, but maybe couldn't afford to make a record. And I was like, well, I got to have some kind of outlet to where I can still work with them and it's beneficial for both parties. So it's very much like I'm just figuring out what it even looks like. And so I've got Mitchell Ferguson and Holly Beth on it right now, and we're both working on records for both of them. But yeah, it's just a lot of like, what does this actually look like? And what does it take to run a label? And it's not as easy as I thought it would be. So, but nothing is.
Right. Yeah. That new Mitchell Ferguson, he's a great guy. And that new song you put out, that is so different than like anything I've heard in a while. Like in his group of artists that he hangs around with, it's so refreshing.
Man, when he brought, so I've been working with both him and Holly for close to 2 years now, just like trying to find their sound. And, we cut a whole record with Mitchell, and it was like a very alternative rock, just like straight up rock album. And then he brought me FYS. He wrote that song, and I was like, oh, dude, this is it. And so as soon as we cut that song, he just started writing that style. And we have, 10 to 15 songs similar to that we're working on for the album. And then, so yeah, that's been super exciting. And Holly too, we're killing it. We're still like looking for songs for Holly, and she's still writing and stuff. And her and Mitchell are doing some co-writing together. So yeah, but yeah, Mitchell, that song is, when he showed it to me, I was like, oh dude, this is sick.
Is there any, I know you probably can't give anything away for these upcoming things, but is there anything you can like tease that you're working on without getting in trouble by the artist? If not, it's cool.
Oh man. Well, let's see. I think I'm pretty sure everybody's advertised, but Austin Meade's got a record dropping
Mm-hmm.
on Friday, I believe. And then
Friday.
Kody West has a record dropping hopefully this month. And Gia's got a record dropping sometime soon. And then Koe's just dropped. So it was like I had been working on these records for like a year, all at the same time, and it was getting a little stressful. But yeah, they're all kind of dropping at the same time. And there's a couple other things that I'm not at liberty to say, but
Okay, yeah. Is there a certain amount of time that it typically takes to make like a full length album, or is it different for everyone?
it's getting faster. Like, because when I made Noise Complaint, I had no idea what I was doing. So it's just like we had to recut the guitars, I think 2 times, just because I was like, oh my God, dude, I don't know how to dial in these tones. And it took me a while. And that I think probably took close to 2 years to make. But it was just like I would go hang out with Koe for like 2 weeks and we would work on the record. Then it'd be a few months and then, we'd start working on it again. So it wasn't just like 2 continuous years. But and then El Paso, he started writing for it probably mid to late 2021. And then we went in on January of this year and cut it in 3 weeks, basically, at Sonic Ranch. And then, it took me like a couple more months of just needed some musicians for certain songs. And I would either send songs to them and they would send them back or whatever. And then editing and mixing and mastering. So usually from start to release, I would say expect a year, but it can go faster. I think Nashville works a little bit faster than that, but they're cutting potentially 5 to 10 songs a day. And
Right.
we're not doing that here. But
So is there any I guess advice you could give to like anyone who wants to go down your path that you chose, anyone who wants to produce, whether they start in their bedroom or just don't know where to start at all?
man, yeah, YouTube. Like that, I learned everything on YouTube. And then there's other websites. Like there's this one called Mix with the Masters, and there's Pure Mix. Like there's multiple websites that you can, pay a yearly fee or whatever. And it's just like all the top people in the industry are sitting down and going through how they did this or whatever. And it's just like, you got to soak everything in and you just got to start trying to make records. Like you're not going to make money right up front. You're just going to have to find bands that just either want to make a record and have no money, or they're your buddies or whatever. But it's like, you just got to try it. Cause at least for me, it's like, I learn best hands on. So, I'll do a record, it'll get released, and then I'll listen to it a month later. I'm like, God, this sounds terrible. Here's where I could improve on it. It's like just constantly, you have to release stuff. I will say that. Like if you can't just sit on things, it's very tempting because you're like, man, this isn't as good as, the best stuff in the world. Well, if you don't release it, I don't really think you're going to get better, because it's just, I don't know. There's something about releasing it into the world and you can't change it. And you're like, man, that's permanent. Next one, I need to get a little bit better in this area or whatever. And yeah, I mean, it's a grind, and there's thousands of kids who want to do this. So it's like, you just got to outwork everybody else, and you got to get a little lucky. Like I met Koe,
Right.
and it was just right place, right time. But yeah, just don't, you got to really want it. I'll say that it's a lot. You just got to really want it.
So is there like is there a certain genre that would be easiest for someone in your position to engage in, or
It's a
is
good
it kind of
question.
even playing field with all of them?
Um, man, it you can pretty much make any genre of music on a laptop now. So it's like there's really no excuse. But I honestly think that the Texas scene is great for it because the fan base here is just so accepting, and they're very accepting to different things. And so it's like getting into the Texas scene, it was smaller, and it's, still a smaller scene, but it's getting bigger. But it's like there's not thousands of producers in the Texas scene trying to make it. It's like there's a handful. So it's like there's much more talent to work with. So, I don't know. I would say find a scene that you just like the music of and just try to make records you like. Because if you're constantly trying to make something just to make it, I don't know that you'll ever quite hit it. And if you do, you're not going to be happy. You'll be like, man, I'm making music that I hate just for a paycheck or whatever. So yeah, just always follow what you like and just try to find, the bands that you think have potential and see what happens.
Awesome, man. We could end on that. Man, I appreciate you hopping on and talking to me. Glad we could finally make it work.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, go ahead. No problem. Go ahead and drop like wherever people could find your socials, or if people would want to be interested in like maybe hiring you or whatever, go ahead and drop whatever
Yeah.
plugs you got.
My Instagram is Taylor J. Kimball. And then on my Instagram bio, I've got my website link. You can go to that and see everything I've done. And there's also like a connect tab in there that you can email me and just send me a submission and send me some demos. I love hearing new music. Always looking for new bands. So,
All right, you guys heard it here. So go ahead and hang tight, Taylor. When I sign off here, we'll finish everything up. But everyone else, thanks for listening. This is Rowdy Alternative. Y'all have a good night.